ashes. So I'll just say that so it doesn't distract anyone.
Thanks for that, Kate.
Yeah, look, I've been really excited about having, this conversation, because we've got, both, Matt and Chris here, who have a huge wealth of experience in terms of delivering mindfulness, within the corporate space. And I say corporate rather than sort of the workplace, generally. And it seems a really timely time to be having this, conversation, because over the, let's say, the last 5 years, we've seen such huge changes in organisations. We've had COVID, we've had different ways of, of work from home, virtually. We see organisations having to pivot and look at the way that they do things before we even start to bring in the financial environment that, that many countries are dealing with at the moment. And within that, of course, the way that we approach mindfulness, the way that mindfulness is perceived, there is the potential for that to, to be changing. We're really having a look at the way that, mindfulness programs are developing in this particular environment, and what we need to be aware of in terms of people trying to bring mindfulness into the workplace, whether we're already part of a corporate or whether we're coming in as trainers and so on. So this is really just an opportunity to kind of, I guess, almost have a state of the union. Where are we at the moment? What are people, thinking about? Where are the, the issues and the opportunities that this current environment, allows us? So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to both Matt and Chris, just to get a sense from them, what is happening. But we're going to make certain that there's plenty of time for all of you to, ask questions as we go. And we'll leave at least 20 minutes, at the end. But if you want to put anything in the chat, any questions as we go, please do, and we'll try and pick those up, as we go. Otherwise, we'll make sure that we that we answer them sort of at the end. And I know that we're all really busy, and it's really quite easy to kind of just have to, rush off to the end. But I do invite you just to stay for those last few minutes to see what Teresa has got, planned for the rest of the year in terms of what the Mindful Workplace community are doing, because there's some other great stuff coming up. But before we get to that, let's look at this great stuff. Matt, can I throw to you first? And I'm interested in what your observations are in terms of mindfulness in the workplace now. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Anything that's different?
Yeah, thank you, Kate, and hello to everyone. Very pleased to be here after my long relationship with the MWC, helping to get things established, and it's great to be back to talk about mindfulness in the corporate workplace. Well, I'm a transformational change lead at SAP, and the change that we have to go through in terms of what we're doing at the moment is we're moving from an on-premise business to a cloud business. I won't get too technical, but there's a lot of changes in our business model and in the way we interact with customers and the way we deliver our services. That means there's a lot of also changes in roles and organizational structures. And so for me, mindfulness and emotional intelligence and its role in personal and leadership development has never been so important. I mean, it's absolutely critical. I couldn't do my job if we didn't have a mindfulness and emotional intelligence offering in place. The change wouldn't be happening. So that's one observation that I probably can make straight off, is that it's absolutely connected to what we're doing in our core transformation of our business. And that doesn't mean to say that we make it mandatory for everyone, certainly not, but it's certainly one of our most popular offerings, bar none, within SAP, and it has been for quite some time. So when it comes to actually looking at the uptake on courses and personal development, mindfulness and emotional intelligence is up there. So what am I seeing as well? I'm seeing the language of mindfulness, just the word mindfulness, become more accepted and more commonplace. When I'm talking to colleagues or managers or leaders, you don't get such of a a shocked sort of look. Oh, mindfulness? Don't tend to get that so much now. It's becoming more accepted, and people have either learned something about it and maybe not actually started to practice it, or maybe they are practicing it. You get people in different levels, but the conversation, the door is more open to having the conversation about what it is and why it's important. So I've noticed that, and we've been doing this at SAP now for about the past decade, since it really got started. And so that's really changed the acceptance of it. The other observation that I'm seeing, I think is really important for anyone on this call or listening to this or watching this, is that it's no longer just seen as an intervention for those that are stressed or having challenging times. I think people are beginning to realize that it's it's for everyone at any point. So that's really becoming more accepted now, and I think that helps in the fact that we position it as a leadership development program or a personal development program. So it's very linked to health and well-being. It's very important for health and well-being, of course, and there are linkages there, but it's seen very much as part of development. And when we say leadership development, we're talking about leading from where you are, not just functional leadership development. And then the other thing I would say before handing back to you is, one of the things that I'm seeing is the absolute linkage of the critical importance of mindfulness and emotional intelligence linked to other core skills for for today's workforce and the future workforce. So if I give one example, systems thinking, systemic thinking, systems intelligence is something that I've been focusing on a lot in the past couple of years, and trying to help build competence and build our skills around that, because that kind of systemic thinking helps us solve customer problems, helps us step back from some of the really big challenges that we're trying to help customers with, and also brings about more of an interventionist way of solving problems, rather than trying to solve the whole problem itself or trying to fix the whole system. And actually, in order to do that kind of work, in order to be able to step back and see things from a systemic point of view, you have to have quite a high level of self-awareness as well. And so mindfulness is becoming linked and becoming intrinsic to other skills that are really important for us in the future, as our as our organization becomes more agile, as we become more adaptable, as changes become more prevalent. We're having to shift the way that we work, and so mindfulness really underpins that. So yeah, I'm seeing a much broader sort of acceptance. I'm seeing a much more of an understanding in leadership that this is critical. It's not just a soft and fluffy nice to have, it's actually essential.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. As you're describing that, I'm hearing that it's actually embedded as something that you do, the way that you work, and the shift seems to be about people not thinking it's kind of a bit left field or something, but actually it's core, to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Chris, I think you said you're doing about 600 different mindfulness projects a year. I might have got that figure right, but quite an intense number. What are you noticing? How would you describe the state of the union with what you're seeing? Oh, you're on mute. Yeah.
I've never been on mute before. Honestly, it's never happened to me before. So anyways, yeah, so we do about 550 to 650 projects per year. I think that the way we look at it, we see 4 phases in mindfulness interventions. The first phase was really just MBSR, MBCT, the very classical formats being brought to the workplace. And that was very important. I really want to stress that, actually, because essentially, the way people who have developed MBSR, MBCT they did that with a very high focus on evidence-based in a clinical setting. Okay? And so essentially that meant a focus on modularity, on repeated practice, on understanding mechanisms. Okay. And this is actually, for me, the ground basis of why mindfulness actually has grown in the working place. A lot of interventions in the working place, honestly, are voodoo, you know? I really say that utterly clearly. I talk to so many companies, and they honestly have no idea what the interventions they're doing have an impact. They don't measure, they don't track over the long term. You know, and often I come into the room and you're like, oh, you're the esoteric one. And I say, honestly, you're the esoteric ones. Okay, I'll show you data on intervention outcomes, and you have no data on your intervention outcomes. Okay, so I just want to say it's a very important starting point, you know, because on the one hand, we see an evolution away from MBSR and MBCT, but I don't want to in any way degrade that, because that laid the basis for actually modular, realistic interventions. And I think that that's, for me, the fundamental point. Mindfulness is the examination of reality. Okay, that's actually what mindfulness is in my eyes. And a lot of what goes on in working life is completely and utterly unrealistic. Okay? It has nothing to do with how humans function. You know, like what Matt's saying, systems intelligence, we are immersed in a system. If you do not accept that reality, you will not be functioning well, okay? So, you know, I think that that really is the source for everyone of understanding why mindfulness has a place. You see, it's not a little place in the corner, like, 10 years ago, there's those who are stressed over here in the corner. We have a little something for them, you know what I mean? Is actually, most of working life is utterly unrealistic. I'm sorry to say that. And unless people get real about how humans function, how people collaborate well, how actually outcomes are realized, then, you know. So anyway, so, you know, I'm sorry to sometimes be a bit, you know, whatever. I kind of get a bit severe sometimes about these things. I'm sorry. I studied physics, by the way, so I tend to get very real about things. And anyway, so, you know, that's the starting point. Then the second phase we see is just formal mindfulness-based trainings, which are workplace specific. So there's a lot of those, you know, whether it's, we have one called Working Mind, there are others out there. So those are clearly workplace specific mindfulness, which are just more nuanced, more adjusted to the workplace. The third phase that we see, and I'd say about 20% of our volume is in those. The third phase we see is trainings around things like systems intelligence, collaboration, resilience. So for example, you know, we've done a lot of trainings on mindfulness and systems intelligence for systems engineers. So again, if you look at the characteristics of the best systems engineers, there was a study by NASA looking at what characteristics the best systems engineers have. And if you take the list of those characteristics, half of them are very technical characteristics, and the other half you could just put them into a mindfulness box. I mean, honestly, it's quite funny, do you know what I mean? Because, and then you kind of show people this and say, well, how do you get people to be like that? You know, and then they shrug their shoulders, you know? So anyway, so we see a lot of work around things like resilience, collaboration. We published on collective intelligence and mindfulness for leadership teams with Boston Consulting together, you know, and you really see strong outcomes. So that's, you could say, the third phase. And then the fourth phase are really transformative programs, which are fundamentally mindfulness based. So for example, with the EU, we're doing the Inner Green Deal, which is, you know, basically supporting the, you know, the transformation, the environment. We're working with the UN on the Inner Development Goals. So there's a lot of, we also have the mindfulness-based sustainable transformation program. So, you know, these are things where essentially mindfulness is really coming into its own as a, you know, I guess in the first two phases, mindfulness is the headline. In the third phase, mindfulness is not the headline, but it's the medicine. And in the fourth phase, you could say it's the headline and the medicine in some sense. So that's what we, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And I think just in terms of intervention formats, I think we also see a lot of, you know, because we always do pre and post assessments, so we see a lot of innovation in intervention formats. So we see the classical trainings, we see sprints. We work a lot with sprints where we work for 20 days, every day with somebody, with people. Those are very strong effect sizes. We see journeys where we work with populations of 1,000 people at the same time, where people self-assess and identify what practices they need, what kind of, you know, what kind of, where they are, what they need. And then they kind of, you know, self-organize into those. And we also do labs where we have 10 to 20 teams coming together at the same time to work on their habits, and the teams share their habits. So, you know, you have to have a lot of innovation, of course, in intervention format and intervention delivery. That's very important nowadays, because you need to, at some, you know, there's always this pressure of scaling from companies, you know, basically get it to 1,000 people for basically 10 pounds. That's, you know, the usual request, you know, which kind of comes, you know, and then you kind of just have to, okay, well, but look, here's the data. Okay, you're not going to have a magical effect. let's be realistic. How many people do you want to reach? What effect sizes? How much practice? How much time? So once you begin to work with these parameters of companies, then you can kind of get realistic and say, okay, look, realistically, we're not going to change everybody in half an hour, but we can suggest the following if you'd like to have the following effect on the following outcomes. So I think that's what I mean about reality. I think fundamentally mindfulness is about understanding causality in the inner and the outer world, and affecting that in a realistic way. So that's why I see, a great future for mindfulness. I think it's, as Matt was saying, I honestly think in the future about 70% of leadership development will be basically with mindfulness. Because if you look at the effectiveness of leadership development interventions, unless you have a daily practice, you're not going to change your leadership behavior. It's just the reality. I mean, I look at myself, I'm a leader and I get feedback, and the feedback isn't always good, frankly, even though I'm Mr. Mindfulness, but still, I'm also sometimes a bad leader, and, I need to work on things. And if I don't work on them daily, then it's just not going to happen.
But there's also something there in terms of leadership about being able to be in those present moments where you do get the difficult, feedback, or you're in the difficult situations, where mindfulness, is such a strong skill. But the sense I get from what you've both described is that there has been a shift, certainly where you're working, much more from the basic, we'll come in, we'll do, say an 8-week program or something, to much more being about weaving it into other areas, whether it's systems thinking, whether it's leadership. Have I understood that correctly, that you're seeing a change there?
Yes, and I think maybe I just want to add a little point to that is, once you have the mentality of being realistic about effect sizes of interventions, modularity of interventions, the practices, you actually can think about things in a very different way. So, for example, when we do a lot of work on psychological safety, large-scale psychological safety work for teams, hundreds of teams at the same time. And, there's a lot of blah, blah out there about psychological safety. But I think from the point of view of mindfulness, we identify 24 habits that teams exhibit or don't exhibit. And you can really see which habits contribute actually to shifts in psychological safety in the teams. And so I think that, it's not just that we combine mindfulness with another topic, it's just that from the point of view of understanding causality, understanding the mind, understanding how humans function, you can actually approach topics in a very different way. And you can actually approach topics in a more realistic way than actually most people are doing, you see? Because, one company, very large global company, 200,000 people. Yes, we're doing psychological safety. Great. It's a number 3 priority for the CEO this year. Wonderful. What are you doing? We've done a digital learning course. That's going to make a difference, isn't it? I mean, it's just like what planet are you on? Have you done this before? Yes, we did it last year for this topic. Did it change anything?
So a lot about the theory and not about doing.
Yeah.
And
what I would add to that as well, Kate, Chris, is that what we've had to do as a corporate mindfulness practice is evolve and innovate. So whilst I paint a very exciting picture of the evolution of it, we as anybody that knows the software world at the moment knows the pressures that large tech companies like us are under. I mean, everyone's under a lot of pressure, but we've had to restructure. We managed to keep everyone intact through COVID, but now we are having to look at how we restructure the company. So with that comes a lot of pressure on people and processes and budgets and everything. So the global mindfulness practice has had to innovate, throughout that, by offering other courses, other interventions, other services. We've got a great partner in SOI Global, so Search Inside Yourself. If everybody's aware of that, we partner with Search Inside Yourself. So much so that actually we're now helping SOI to help other companies, mostly large companies like ourselves, to help develop their own mindfulness practices. Because the corporate world is not an easy one to navigate when you're talking about this. Even with the acceptance I'm talking about that we're seeing, that has built up over the period of a decade. So I do feel for others that are just starting on the journey, because it's not it's not an easy one. So I think having the likes of Chris and Awaris, or having SOY or having SEP kind of talk to you about that how to start, where to start, why to start, you know, really is quite helpful. So recently I was teaching Alianda and Schlumberger as part of their teacher training program. So that is a promising thing as well, you know, similar to the mindful workplace community here, where people are coming together and sharing best practices and experiences. I'm beginning to see, you know, large corporates work together to actually understand, how do you do this in a company of 100,000 people that's restructuring, that's under pressure, you know, in this volatile environment. It can be done, but going into it with a partner or someone who actually has taken the journey before can really help. So yeah, so I didn't want my opening piece to sound too overly optimistic, because, you know, it's still hard. We still have to fight for our place every year. You know, the budget has to be rejustified every year, and I'm sure that's the same for most other corporates as well. But yeah, I think diversification, innovation, embedding into other programs has all helped the longevity of it. You know, we're not just one thing.
And as you say, you know, you're having to fight every year for the budget. And I'm just looking at the question here from sort of, you know, Douglas, you know, are you seeing a trend to move away from using the term mindfulness, you know, itself, even with greater acceptance of mindfulness, the term can still be a barrier for executive leadership? Curious on your thoughts. You know, you've talked about going from COVID to now talking about sort of resilience. Are we having to change the name, you know, or the way that we're describing what, you know, what is delivered?
I mean, I think you do have to, because it's not so much about hiding something. It's just about honoring where people are, you know. People come to you with their problems, and their problems are, as Matt says, they're urgent, they're severe, they're really struggling, you know. And so I think it's very important you don't put your solution in the headline. You don't say, you know, whatever your problem is, but really listen to their problem, understand the problem. They have to feel heard, and they have to feel that there is a, you know, causal likelihood that the intervention will make a difference. But then, of course, we do know that mindfulness is the most effective intervention. You see what I mean? I mean, that's the interesting thing about it, is if you look at the recent NICE review, the National Institute of Care and Health Excellence in the UK, they did a review of interventions in the workplace. And they said that mindfulness and meditation were the most effective ones, you know, and it's, you know, it's no wonder, because it requires repeated practice. So, you know, I think you have to really be willing to listen and, you know, take people's challenges seriously, and then design something. And then, you know, and then we always say, yeah, and, you know, part of the ingredient, part of the medicine is mindfulness. And, you know, and some people, once you do programs where the headline is not mindfulness, you do have some people, you know, who sit there like this, you know, you can see them. They're not on screen, you can see them too. As soon as the mindfulness part comes, it's like, you know what I mean? But actually, you know, after a while, they try it out and go, okay, well, this actually, yeah, this was something, this kind of works, you know. So, you know, I think that's where we are. It's always important to take people seriously, address what their needs are, and at the same time, not be shy about who you are.
But what I'm taking from that is that because you're dealing with the problem that they have, you know, that's uppermost in their mind, that you're not coming with here is a mindfulness, you know, sort of solution, you know, here. So as trainers, as other people trying to create a mindfulness foundation within organizations, you know, would your advice to people here be to use different language? You know, I'm going to say to sell it, but you all know what I mean, to, you know, persuade people that this is a intervention that's worth doing. Are we having to think about different ways of describing it?
I mean, in SAP, I don't think we shy away from using the term, because we're quite proud of the fact that we've got a mindfulness practice, and that's a brand internally that people recognize. However, we do have some programs, particularly leadership programs, so conscious leadership, you know, self-aware leadership. You know, we've got programs that have mindfulness in them, but that's obviously a different thing. So I think for me, when I'm up against this kind of discussion, I often ask questions of leaders rather than saying, a bit like Chris is saying, rather than saying, well, the solution is mindfulness. I often ask questions, more coaching questions about, what would it be like to be to have a more conscious leadership style, or what would it be like to be a more self-aware leader? Try and sort of bounce the questions back to them if I'm in a discussion with someone about it, rather than trying to get it all centering around mindfulness itself, because it's more about, like Chris says, the challenges and the problems and things that they're going through, and then working out how we can meet them where they are. So for us, we don't really shy away from using the term, but it is embedded in a lot of things now. So when a leader sees a program about future leadership skills, then it might not be the headline thing, but it definitely is in the program somewhere.
Yeah, I think, as Matt said, it's not about shying away, and again, this comes from a little bit, I tend to not see mindfulness as a monolithic thing, as a thing actually at all. It's really examination of reality. So when you look at things like systems intelligence, when they say we'd like our engineers to become more systems intelligence, well, then you look at the research and the evidence. Why do people not behave in a way which is actually in accord with how reality is? Because that's their reality. Why do they stay stuck in their component thinking, or they're in their functional thinking? Well, because they're threatened, or because they have certain mindset. And then when you look at that and identify that and help people understand that and say, okay, well, these are the characteristics of mindset we need to shift. These are the kind of behavioral characteristics we need to shift. These are practices that will help them do that. Then you kind of even dissolve the fact that you're talking about mindfulness, but you're just saying, look, let's be realistic. If these are the mindsets you want to shift, if these are the behaviors you want to shift, then you have to have practices which will shift these behaviors. And here's the evidence that actually this behavior is best shifted. This practice, this behavior, some practices are in systems world, you have to do perceptual practices that people perceive reality differently, because people don't even perceive reality actually from a systems view, you see? So, it depends again, and that's why I tend to not even see mindfulness as a monolithic thing, but just what's the issue, okay? And then what are the practices that are likely to be changes to that? And, and they always will involve some kind of mind-body practices and the regularity of mind-body practices, you see? And that, of course, we would call mindfulness. And we always call them mindfulness too. It's not like we shy away from that. But I think in the way we approach it is not to just even think of it, we're either hiding mindfulness or not. It's actually, we're talking about concrete shifts in mindset and behavior that have to be realized. And what are the practices that are likely to realize that? And what repetition do you need of these practices? That's an important thing too. It's not going to happen if people once look at a wall differently,
And thinking about sort of reality, going back to that term, the reality at the moment is, AI is having a huge impact in all sorts of areas. We've got a great question here. How can we leverage AI and technology to reach mindfulness for large organizations? Because we can't pretend it's not happening.
I'll leave this one for Matt.
Well, the reason why I said the sound is because obviously we're a software technology company who's investing a huge amount of our money into AI and into AI technologies.
Perhaps maybe I can just provide some context behind my question. So I work for a large bank with over 160,000 employees, and I work with Douglas and Jana as a part of the Mindful on Wall Street group. So for the last 5 years, mindfulness has been included into the analyst training program. So any new incoming analysts, mindfulness has been taught along with them. There's been training with senior leadership. Now there is, they have now developed an employee resource network around mindfulness. So the idea is how to bring it enterprise-wide. And if you have an employee group of larger than 150,000 plus, it's like you need to be able to scale up, but at the same time be authentic. Yeah, so just thought I'd give you a little bit of background.
Thank you for that.
So we aren't actually doing any particular projects around AI in SAP and mindfulness. We we are still very much looking at the sort of multiplier model of communities and ambassadors and teachers in each of our departments, in each of our market units, each of our countries, so that we've got presence everywhere that people are, basically. And so we have local practice groups, we have local communities, we have global communities, and then we have sort of special interest communities within that. So we are, in terms of scaling and keeping that presence and sort of keeping that heartbeat alive in the organization of mindfulness, we're still very much relying on, believe it or not, being in a software company, we're still very much relying on the people power part of that. Technology does come into it, because obviously we do use, we use SharePoint and other things to actually share documentation, videos, best practice, those kinds of things. But we haven't, to my knowledge, delved into AI and how that could specifically help. We do partner with Insight Timer. So Insight Timer is the app which we provide that as a subscription free of charge to employees. And we also provide some of our guided meditations on that as well. So that helps to create another sort of community for those that like to use an app. Obviously not everybody is into the app side of things. So that technology helps to reach the audience that, like to consume it in that way. And then, yeah, obviously you've got your classical group settings where we have people coming together, or we have special guest speakers coming in. So, we're doing all the normal things that you would expect us to use technology for. But to my knowledge, we may well have some people that are looking at AI, because we do have a community of people where they can submit experiments and ideas for how AI could be used. Obviously, there's a lot around ChatGPT going on at the moment, and we've got our own version of that within SAP that people are playing with. So it's likely that someone in the mindfulness community somewhere is experimenting with that. If I find out, I will let you know.
Well, it sounds like, particularly AI, that it's worth having this, almost booking in a session on this in maybe 18 months or 2 years, because I think, it'll be some interesting conversations at that point. Chris, do you find that, the companies you're working with are asking for more technology, asking for more, AI assisted sort of projects?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly they're asking for technology, a lot. And we actually have done that for a number of companies. We've actually given them a platform. So with one client, we rolled out mindfulness with them to 32,000 people in 2-day workshops. So that was 3,684, I think, workshops that they did organize. So that was, really heavy. And so, we did that with our platform. And they actually kept our platform for other things now. So they use our platform for other things. And that's very important, because again, if you look at, and one of the ways we designed our platform is that it really assists champions. Because essentially, again, if you look at intervention doses and you look at, the uptake of digital mindfulness versus, a mindfulness which is transmitted in some kind of person-to-person situation, you see that the practice intensity is a lot higher, up to 10 times. There was one study which basically said the practice intensity in some kind of human interaction setting versus a purely digital setting is 10 times. And essentially it comes down to a dosage issued, in the sense mindfulness is a medicine, it's a dosage issued, So, so I think just in terms of addressing that, in terms of scaling, I think the key thing is you have to address the issues that companies are facing, So, it's combining it with the issues. So, either with the change programs, like Matt is doing with resilience is a big one at the moment for a lot of companies where they have issues in resilience for thousands of people. And what we do there is we do resilience assessments for thousands of people at the same time. And from that, we identify the issues. And we also know which issues are causal. So we are able to predict which habits and which issues are causal for resilience outcomes. And then we say, you need interventions on these issues now. And that kind of gets them to really think causally again, to go, okay, take a population of 1,000 people, 2,000 people, identify their resilience issues, the challenges they're facing. Here are the causal interventions that will make a difference for them. And that, that allows you to quickly reach 1,000 people, for example, if you do something like that. So we also work, for example, we work with German Rail, 4,000 train drivers. They have safety issues. Okay, so again, we looked at safety issues. So I think I'm not a fan of saying we need to bring mindfulness to 200,000 people. I don't know if those 200,000 people want mindfulness. Do you know what I mean? But those 200,000 people have different issues that they're dealing with. You see what I mean? So, for example, as you say, analysts. If you look at the research on super forecasters, people who are able to predict and analyze things accurately, you see that they have a lot lower cognitive biases. Okay. And so connecting that, so you look at the work on cognitive bias. There's a number of really interesting papers on mindfulness and cognitive bias. So this is essentially, I think how to go about that is you identify issues in populations, and then you help those populations, and then you scale that. And then the AI issue, I must say, I haven't formed my opinion on that at all. First of all, there are, of course, a number of, we actually have a project group on AI. And there are a number of issues that, as an organization, in terms of training capability, you have to learn how to deal with. But for me, always the key question is, in the end, we're trying to affect mind-body phenomena. So you see, we have to, and it has to, in the end, and this is where I think a lot of people are quite naive. In the end, there has to be a physiological outcome. Okay, so you know what I mean. If I practice mindfulness, one of the skills I might learn is to relax my nervous system, which has a physiological outcome, or I might shift my perception, which has a physiological outcome, you see? And so, for me, the golden question always is, with any intervention, how do we know that this will have a physiological outcome? And that's why, in terms of AI, the connection between AI and interventions, I mean, AI is by its nature not physiological. You see what I mean? And so, I don't have an answer onto that question, whether AI will help us make better physiological interventions. I mean, we do a lot of work. We did with this one company where we did 30,000 people. All 30,000 got the ability to wear HRV monitors. So this is high grade. From First Speed, high quality HRV monitors, which measured their stress level over a period of a week, and they were able to see what practices shifted that. So that's, where you're using technology to help people, okay? But that isn't AI yet. So that's a little bit where I am on that topic.
But it certainly shows that evidence with personal tech, even, like Apple Watches and so on, as they all develop. And it comes back to measurement. I know, Chris, that you're very much into measuring everything you do. What are organisations asking you to measure at the moment, or what are they, maybe not asking you to measure, but what are they impressed by in terms of measurements at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is one of my bugbears, is I'm very sad that organisations are actually not asking us to measure very much. Which is mind-boggling for me. It's just unrealistic. You can't have well-being interventions. You can't have resilience interventions. Leadership, I mean, companies, 30,000 people into leadership training, and they have not measured behavioral outcomes. Like, what's the point? I don't know. So anyway, one of the things I think that works very well is we always try to get causal with our measurements. And, if I look at myself as a mindfulness practitioner, in the end, I know it comes down to habits. Okay, so that's why we always look at habits, measurable habits. So at team level, we've identified 24 habits that teams do or do not do. And then we can predict, you see, when we measure whether teams do that, teams are honest. They say, do we do this? Do we do that? And then you can predict, okay, what's the psychological safety in that team going to be? What's the innovation in that team going to be? What's the performance in that team going to be? Okay, so that is very helpful. And the same thing for the resilience. We've worked really a long time now with a lot of research and understanding what are the 12 behaviors or skills people have which make a causal impact on resilience outcomes and on stress outcomes. And it's interesting, you can really see that actually, you can identify populations of people in very high stress zones which have high resilience scores, and you can see what behavior they're exhibiting. And from that, of course, you can predict actually what people. So I work a lot with the Mercedes-Benz Formula One team. And there we do that with populations. We say, okay, they're going to go into very, very high stress zones. How are we going to make sure that they remain resilient in those high stress zones? And I think that's the way you have to go. You have to go away from thinking we're going to change somebody's state on a temporary way to say it's about skill development. And actually, we need to be able to predict which skills we need to develop and what practices lead to those skills. And I think that our clients have never seen anything like that, And I think that that's where I think, and again, this goes back to my bugbear about reality and causality. I think fundamentally, change comes because you have a better understanding of reality than where people are. So if you look at, again, what Matt was saying about systems intelligence, systems is reality. I mean, we live in complex systems. Do you see what I mean? So actually, why do people get stressed? It's because they're not in accord with reality. Why do people get stressed at work? It's because they're not in accord that actually people need a good balance of recovery. It's just, it's unrealistic. High performance sports people know that. Therefore, why do people call themselves high performance leaders? Don't know that. It's just kind of like mind boggling. So, anything which helps people actually look at their reality in a more accurate way and have a causal effect. That's actually what, for me, the nature of mindfulness is about. When you look at historically, what was mindfulness about? Mindfulness was actually a practice of being able to understand and have a causal impact on reality in a way which leads to less stress and is more in accord with the nature of things. So, I think that that's really where science can help us. And that's what's really fantastic about work of, both of, Search Inside Yourself, of even the Mind and Life Institute, to bring together these two worlds. And this is what I would encourage everybody who's involved in mindfulness to really get interested in. Not in the sense that, neuroscience is just another theory, it's just another version of reality. Okay, so, it's not a better version of reality per se, but nonetheless, it allows you to begin to causally connect certain practices or certain outcomes. And so therefore, I would, really encourage everyone to, either become a little bit familiar with neuroscience or with systems thinking or with resilience science, to really apply your mindfulness understanding to a particular field that you care about. And that, I think, leads to outcomes. So going back, sorry, to your question, those are the things that have a strong impact on clients, is when you can show them causal predictions of what behaviors will lead to what outcomes. And again, it's not possible unless you understand habit formation. You see?
And what I'm hearing there is, whether it's neuroscience or mindfulness or business or systems thinking, it's about starting with the language that whoever you're talking with actually understands. And it can go in by any kind of, sort of means, but it's about where they understand what their problem is.
It's really about helping them where they are, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to throw it open to everyone else, because I've been asking lots of questions. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to, take the opportunity to ask Matt and Chris? Or
and maybe I just address two of the questions in the chat just to address them. Should I just do that? So Tsewang's question.
Please.
So I can send it to you, Tsewang. It's the study which was done on the Happier app. So it was a study done with people getting the Happier app, and some of them had a live course as well, and some of them just had the app. That had about a 10-to-1 practice intensity. And there was another study recently published by Wooliver et al. So Wooliver is the author. It was a study based on eMindful. And again, they did assessments of people's practice intensity when they just had digital content versus when they took part in live sessions. And both of those came out with the Wooliver study looked at effect sizes of the stress outcomes, and the Happier study looked at the practice intensity of the participants, okay? And then, Jana, you mentioned about mindfulness. That's the National Institute of Care and Health Excellence, NICE it's called, NICE. If you type in NICE, well-being and workplace, it's a study that was released on the 7th of March, 2022. You will see that study. It's huge. It's really a huge study. You will have a hard time finding the key sentence, which actually says mindfulness is the most effective intervention. That study is in the, there's about 400 documents there, and that study is in the document on individual interventions. And again, I can send this to you if you want. You can just connect to me.
Thank you. And also another great resource at the bottom from Maritz there, from ChatGPT on CEO of mindfulness and the future of life.
Oh, interesting.
So that looks like a really interesting.
Okay, interesting, yeah.
Take a look at. Anyone else got any questions?
I have a question for Matt. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Robert.
So when you're doing Search Inside Yourself, or whatever you're calling it now, inside the company, are you actually taking people out of their jobs for 2 days, or are you doing it over time?
Well, we used to. So pre-pandemic, it always used to be a 2-day course, one day after the other. off-site, take people out of their jobs, and then they'd return, and then they'd do the 4-week challenge with a buddy afterwards, and then they'd self-report on how things went. However, since the COVID pandemic, we've had to adjust that to make sure it's accessible for everyone, and obviously people needed it more than ever in the past few years. So we adjusted it, because to spend 2 days online solid, we found for some people was too much. Some people could handle it. So we actually split the course down into 4 half-day sessions. So the most popular way of running it now is a half day one day, a half day the next day, followed by a week gap, and then another half day and another half day. So that's usually how we deliver it now. Because majority of our training is still online, although we do now do in-person courses again. But we are finding that the uptake on the in-person courses is less than it was pre-pandemic. So more and more people are wanting the online training.
Interesting. Douglas, can I ask, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Kate. I guess the question, goes back to the theme of this today's session around, the state of where things are. There's this kind of evolution that Matt and Chris, you both talked about, but there's also a sense that mindfulness, I'm going to sound like a skeptical person in my organization. I'm one of the champions of mindfulness at Morgan Stanley. But there's a sense that, mindfulness was a trend, and that trend is sort of waning, or we've done that before and it sort of worked or sort of didn't, because Chris, as you were saying, they didn't really measure it, or we have an app for that. And so, we've kind of checked the box on that, and it's taken care of. So that sense of either individuals at the executive level or sort of a collective, like, yeah, we've tried that and it didn't sort of fully work, or, that's, Chris, as you said, that's for the stressed out people, only. And we've got resources for them, that sort of jadedness around it.
Chris, did you want to go for that one first?
Go first, Matt.
Well, one of the things that you're from Morgan Stanley, so I think one of the things that is interesting for our execs is the fact that we measure the Business Health Culture Index at SAP, and that is measured through a number of things, but primarily the data comes from our people survey. So how engaged are employees? What's the level of trust? How they rate their well-being, level of stress, etc. And we do data science around that BHCI number, and we've got data to show that actually has the greatest impact on operating profit. So we can see that 1 percentage point affects operating profit to the tune of somewhere between 90 million to 100 million euros. And we can actually publish that figure in our integrated report. So, for us, if people want to see the figures or the hard, cold sort of evidence that increasing Business Health Culture Index has a direct impact on operating profit, that usually speaks volumes, for people. Obviously, there's other factors that come into play, but I think that's one that we still talk about because it's important, and it has that direct impact. I mean, there's many other benefits to it as well. But yeah, certainly in SAP, you do obviously get people that are more naysayers and say it's past. But I think what we try and do is exemplify the behavior through other leaders. So, I won't stand there defending it all day long. I'll try and bring someone else along who's had benefit in their division of 20,000 people and ask them to join the conversation so that, they can hear it from people that have actually been there and done it. So, I think you're always going to have people that are more skeptical, no matter how far we evolve.
Yeah, and maybe just to support that, and actually, it's, as you say, it's a situation where it's not just they did mindfulness, they did 52 other things, do you know what I mean, in the last 5 years. And according to the data, none of them worked out, by the way. It's important to point out to them, And I mean, I think that's the thing is, one is the data. It is very, very important to have data and to have confidence, that you can show outcomes. And then another thing is, I do think innovation is important, just like Matt is saying, you know, innovation in formats, innovation in headlines, conscious leadership, or so on. You know, I think it's just people just get bored, you know, especially in companies. It's kind of bizarre, you know. They keep talking about being evidence-based, but they just, I'm sorry to say this, they just aren't. You know, they just try whatever the new thing is. You know, I read a book, you know, let's do this now. You know, okay. You know, so I think you have to be open to that and not necessarily see it too critically, but you know, because essentially the stuff that comes in is a new headline around, is it resilience? Is it psychological safety? Is it collaboration? Is it connection? You see what I mean? And then be ready to innovate and say, okay, well, look, let's, you know, well, let's do a pilot. Let's see what the impact is of, you know, certain things. So I think that's the way I've found, you know, and once you begin to, like Matt says, affect business critical, like with the German rail drivers, you know, these are business critical issues. Safety is a business critical issue. We have the same thing for power companies, you know, then there's no lack of evidence. And the same thing for you. I mean, I think, you know, if you look at, actually, we published an article about mindfulness and, you know, safety and, you know, and risk taking in finance, actually in German, unfortunately, but still, I think there's a translated version available, you know. So I think that, you know, it's identifying critical, business critical issues and being courageous enough to go, okay, we're going to have a shift in the outcome, okay? And that's what I do. I tend to, like, for example, I worked with all the diesel people after a diesel scandal for one of the German car companies, you know. This is business critical. I mean, really serious business critical. Do you see what I mean? And because we had a real impact on them, you know, everyone took it seriously, you know. So I think, you know, maybe those are my three recommendations. One is measure, the two is innovate, and the third is don't be shy to go for business critical issues. You know, Matt, you know, the data you're mentioning is business critical, you see, and because you can show that you're connected to that, you know, it's a powerful thing. So, you know, that might help. And maybe just to also, sorry, and maybe just to also, I saw some questions in the chat. I realized I didn't answer, Jana, your other questions. So we have published some of this. Again, I can send you the links. One is with Boston Consulting. We published Collective Intelligence. I recently did a webinar with Unilever on psychological safety data, and also one with Novartis on the resilience assessments data and the causal predictions from resilience. And I can send you those too if you want. And on our website, there's a lot of blog posts. And then I think Natalie, the question too, if you want, I don't know if you want to, mindfulness for busy people. Matt, do you want to go for that one?
And it'll have to be really quick.
That was the question from Natalie.
Yeah,
making mindfulness more accessible for busy people who just don't have time. Yes. Yeah, there's probably a long answer to that question. I think for me, we need to ensure that people have some kind of foundational understanding. So what I wouldn't do at SAP is say, hey, here's an app, go do it, you know, because that's not really our approach. But we do have different ways of people accessing mindfulness taster programs, introduction programs. We do have an app, as I said, Insight Timer. So there are ways of people getting more, I hate to say this in mindfulness, it doesn't work, but bite-sized kind of chunks of things. We have experimented with micro-learning programs as well, which can support introductions to mindfulness. So like sort of 10 or 12 minute micro-learnings per day, things like that. So we have experimented with different formats, but a lot of those tend to be more sort of self-service digital formats. And as Chris, I agree with Chris on that, as you are trying to do something that's mind and body physiological, actually it helps to have that person-to-person approach. So, you know, I often have a lot of people coming to me to say they don't have time, and yeah, it's a difficult one to negotiate. I often say, well, you've got time to take 3 breaths. You've got time to pause.
Matt, what I usually do is I say, show me your smartphone, and then I go to the well-being setting, and I say, but you have time for 2 hours and 46 minutes per day on your smartphone.
Absolutely.
And then I usually leave the discussion there.
That's a great one. And I'm aware we're going to have to leave the discussion, you know, quite, you know, sort of quickly. But I just want to point out Marion's comment about whether we need to have a different way of training for the workplace. Teresa, my thought would be that's worth a whole conversation just in itself. So maybe that's something that we can come back to in another session. And we've got a couple of other sessions coming up. So can you tell us about what else we've got on the agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. And thanks, Marion, for that. Actually, I was about to suggest going on to the Mindful Workplace Community Mighty Networks and posting the question and also see what comes back. It's a great space to generate that discussion. And I just want to share my screen really, really quickly, everybody, to show you what is coming up. If you are a member, or you can join each session individually or make a donation, but it could save you a little bit of money and some paperwork if you join. This is what's coming up in from September to December. Some fantastic events with Vidyamala Birch. Our very own Robert Chender will be hosting a session with Amy Sandler on radical candor. That's about how to give compassionate feedback with kindness, but to help well-being and performance. Then we have the Moment Company, Alex Strang, looking at performance and well-being. They're a small to medium enterprise, so that would be an interesting one to attend, what's going on in SMEs in the mindfulness world, and then climate change and mindfulness towards the end of the year. So please do take a look at our website, and Marion for sure will take your question and maybe make that a session for 2024, but we'll definitely look at that. I know Kate wants to wrap up, but before she does, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Kate, Matt and Chris for your time. It's been absolutely very, very interesting, rich discussion, thought-provoking. I'm sure you'll all agree. So thank you very, very much. But Kate, I'll leave it to you to wrap up now.
Yeah, I just want to say the same. I mean, I could stay here another hour, you know, quite easily continuing this, you know, this conversation. I'm very grateful for all of the experience and the insights that you've brought. Yeah, we can carry this discussion on, you know, Mighty Networks, you know, sort of LinkedIn. Yeah, that's what the community is for. They're not just one-offs. Yeah. It's about actually how do we keep this conversation going, because it's absolutely essential that if we're not having these conversations, where are they happening, and being able to support each other and just bringing what we're noticing, you know, in the in the environment, in the places we're working, we're training, and so on. So yeah, Chris, Matt, thank you very much. Thank you everyone else for turning up today, and yeah, and some great questions. Thank you so much.
We'll see you very soon, I hope. Take care, everybody. Go well.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Great session.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.